to in-house corporate counsel going through these issues and thinking through the ramifications of everything that we've been discussing to date. I'm going to start by introducing a good friend of mine, Josh Rosenstein. He's in-house counsel with Dutko, responsible for compliance on an international corporation. To you, Josh, and then let you go from there.
Thanks very much. It's good to be here. I'm joined this morning by Matt Lepore, who's Vice President, Corporate Secretary, and Chief Counsel, Corporate Governance at Pfizer, and Wes Bazell, who's Assistant General Counsel, Government Affairs for Altria Client Services. And what we thought we would do, because we want to leave plenty of time for discussion, is each of us will give a brief presentation, make it multimedia for you, so we'll have some video presentation as well. And then I'll start to guide the conversation a little bit, but really this is about you and the questions that you have. So I think from our standpoint, this is an interesting panel. My role is, as Stefan mentioned, the Chief of Compliance for an advocacy organization. Government relations, consulting, public relations firm, active in, we've got offices in 7 states, but we are also part of a British publicly traded company, which means that the levels of compliance to which we have to adhere are challenging and numerous. Our role is to represent companies like yours and help you learn how best to interact with government officials, everything from pure GR to government sales, pure consulting, public relations. And I think from our standpoint, the major challenges that we and our clients face are several. First of all, you have to learn what your company is and what it does. And I say this because the nature of your activities obviously needs and how you go about setting up your compliance system. For example, prior to 2009, we were a domestic, privately held company. All of a sudden, 2010 rolls around and we are purchased by a publicly traded company based in the United Kingdom, which means all of a sudden, in addition to all of the United States federal, state, and local lobbying regulations, we are, and obviously the U.S. And state and local anti-bribery requirements, we are now subject to the UK Anti-Bribery Act as well, which forced us immediately to look into our corporate policies and discover what we were doing that could get us in trouble at the parent company level as the UK Bribery Act was being rolled out. But along with knowing what your company is and what it does, you have to know what your teams are doing, and you have to know what they're doing in real time. And I say this because many of you, like my colleagues on the panel, have a government relations staff and you have a sales staff. And oftentimes you might not see any overlap between the two, but as Stefan's slides demonstrated, even though he didn't get through all of them, there is considerable overlap between sales and government relations. For example, and this is an example that Stefan and I use all the time, if you work for a company that makes pencils and you are a salesperson and you've got the Southeast region and you sell pencils to private companies, all of a sudden, one of your clients is the Georgia Department of Education. You are now theoretically a salesperson. You have to know what your folks are doing. And the reason you have to try and know what they're doing in real time is because in many of these jurisdictions, your folks have to get licensed and registered before they take a sales call with those government officials. And this is a real challenge for big corporations, particularly, to know where your folks are on an actual real-time basis. The number of times that I have gotten a call from clients of ours and from staff of ours where they say, hey Josh, I'm about to step foot into the governor's office in Wisconsin. What do I need to do? And then I am forced to say, well, you've got to postpone that meeting so that we can get you licensed and registered before you take the meeting. It's a real challenge. It obviously doesn't make your compliance or your general counsel's office sit too well with the business folks who are just trying to do their jobs. And one of the things that my colleagues will talk about is how you deal with convincing your board and your shareholders and your managers that slowing down that process is sometimes absolutely necessary. The third thing, I think, is making sure that your corporate policies reflect what it is that your team is doing. And obviously, you know your company's best, but I can tell you, in our case, we have drawn a zero-tolerance policy when it comes to things like expenditures and gifts. Even where a small gift might fall within an exemption to a corporate, to a state anti-gift rule or state ethics law, because it's difficult for us in a compliance role to understand where our folks are on a daily basis, we have found that we just run into too many trapdoors. There are too many potential problems out there because, for example, one of our staff members in Tallahassee might not know that the company has registered lobbyists in the state of Colorado. And that official in Tallahassee might decide that he wants to make a gift to the governor of Colorado. And if we are a registered lobbying organization in the state of Colorado at the corporate level, that could impact everything that our folks in these satellite offices do. So you've got to find a way to craft your corporate policies to reflect the reality of what you're doing. And obviously there is generally no one-size-fits-all policy that's going to work best for everyone. In our case, zero tolerance has been the way to go. This has been a demand from our shareholders and our board of directors in London, particularly in the wake of the UK Bribery Act coming into effect. And I know that we're going to talk in a little while in more depth about shareholder and board of director concerns. And the final challenge, I think, is educating your employees, your managers, your board of directors. One thing that I talk about when I'm on these panels is, we do mandatory training for all of our company employees, managers, officers, and directors. We do it on a semi-annual basis. We focus on major issues. Obviously, there's time for questions and answers, but we always start every training session with a picture of Jack Abramoff being let off in handcuffs. There, in my experience, is no way better to get your CEO to understand the importance of compliance and importance of training than to threaten him or her with the possibility of criminal sanctions. That seems to do the trick for us. It's obviously now become sort of the beginning of the training, people sort of boo and hiss and say, where's that slide? Bring it back next time. But nevertheless, you've got to find a way to educate your folks. You've got to find a way to educate them on not only what the laws are as they evolve, but also on what your company policies are as they relate to those various laws. Now, as I said, I work in the advocacy community. Our clients are corporations that themselves have government relations divisions or sales forces that are interacting with government officials. But I'm fortunate to have Matt and Wes here because they deal on the other end. Altria, for example, has been a client of ours before. And, Matt, we can talk later about Pfizer becoming a client of ours. But nevertheless, I think it's important to hear from their standpoint because for many of you in the audience, what they do might directly relate to how you interact with your boards, your shareholders, and your management as well. So, who's going to focus a little bit more on the involvement of and the importance of compliance at the shareholder and board of directors level. And then after that, we'll turn it over to Wes.
Thanks. And thank you, Stefan, for getting us together to talk about these issues. Obviously very timely and important for companies. I am going to take this in a different direction right now. We do have some of the same kinds of issues at Pfizer related to lobbying and contacts with officials, obviously. But what I thought I would talk about today, because this is just kind of demonstrates the breadth of this issue generally in a company, is how we at Pfizer deal with corporate political spending internally, externally, with our shareholders, with our board, with our internal management teams, with our disclosures. That is an issue that is very hot right now. And I know that many companies, because I've heard from many companies recently, are struggling with how to deal with it. Lots of companies have some basic processes in place around their corporate political spending, and they're finding that their shareholders don't find those processes sufficient. And so they're probably engaged. Many of you are probably engaged right now, maybe shareholder proposals. And so I thought it would be helpful just to walk through how this issue plays out at Pfizer. When I talk about this issue and think about this issue, and I've been doing this for a while now, perspective, disclosure isn't the only issue. Most people talk about this issue as disclosure, disclosure, disclosure. You should disclose more. You should disclose everything. And when I think about it, and and talk to our big institutional investors at Pfizer about it, disclosure is just one piece of it. The key, and what most investors that really thoughtfully think about this issue will agree with, is the concept that the key is to have a very strong internal process around corporate political spending. A piece of that process is disclosing, and you can either disclose what you're required to, or you can disclose a little more, and different companies do it different ways. But way before disclosure, you need to have a good internal process. And so what we do at Pfizer is, we have this multi-layered review and approval process that has what we call a political contributions policy committee, of which I'm a member, and a bunch of our chief compliance officer is a member, our head of communications, our head of our DC office, a whole variety of individuals at senior posts throughout the company and within the business. We also then have a PAC steering committee that's kind of on the ground and very familiar with the different jurisdictions where we do give, and they're making recommendations to the PCPC on a regular basis. And then we do have the board's involvement. This is another real hot button issue when you talk about this issue, and when your shareholders will ask about it, and particularly some of the really activist shareholders that are very focused on this issue right now. They believe that you should have the board heavily involved. Maybe the board should approve every single every single request that you make to give. And, my view is that's not practical. It's not practical for a board of directors at Pfizer, given the amount of money that we give and the locations where we give. I mean, if you looked at our report, you would see that we give, a couple of $100, $1,000 all throughout the country. And, to get your board involved in each of those transactions, it's just not possible. So our board is involved, and our board is very, very aware. And they review the reports and they engage on this issue, but it's not something that they do on a regular basis. They more have an oversight responsibility, and the corporate governance committee gets a little bit more into the weeds on it. And then beyond just this review and approval process, it's important to have a lot of internal guidelines around this issue. And one of the big important pieces is disclosure, as I mentioned earlier. And like I said, there are many different things you can disclose, and Stefan was about to put up 3 slides that listed all of the different things that you can disclose, and you'll take those materials home and look at them. But those are the issues that are in those slides that you talk about at the company level, about what you want to disclose, and you talk about it with your shareholders. We at Pfizer disclose a little more than we're required to. We disclose all of our corporate political giving. Everything that the company does from the treasury funds, we disclose it. We disclose it in our PAC report. We're not necessarily required to do that, but we do it. We also disclose things on our website, and we try to make them user-friendly. This is a really important issue. When I talk to shareholders about this issue, most of what they're complaining about is a communications problem, because we have it out there, but we're not communicating it in a way that they can find it or they can understand it. And so lots of times when I talk to shareholders about this, it's simply a matter of me directing them to where they can go find this data that we're putting out there. So that's really important. And then the last point on this slide, when Stefan was talking about the world after Citizens United, it's interesting because from Pfizer's perspective, just what we do as a company, the world has not changed. The world was that we made no independent expenditures at Pfizer before Citizens United, and we make no independent expenditures after Citizens United, and we have a direct corporate policy that we recently enacted that specifically says, despite Citizens United, we're not doing it. And Stefan got into some of the reasons why that is the case, and it's probably obvious to a lot of the corporate clients in the room, but it's just Pfizer's policy that we won't be making independent expenditures despite our right to do so. The big issue is the trade associations. We can probably talk about this for hours. Trade associations are something that the shareholders like to talk about. Certainly the activist shareholders that are very focused on this issue right now like to talk about the trade associations. And it's something that if you're considering this issue or you're liaising with shareholders about it, you will have to address it. We all benefit significantly from trade association relationships. There's no question about it. We do at Pfizer. We find them to be very important relationships, and we're not going to withdraw from trade associations, despite claims to do so at times. So what we try to do is, we try to address the concerns that we hear from shareholders around trade associations in different ways. We express these directly to them. So when I'm talking to them about trade associations, I'm explaining all this, and I'm letting them talk to the individuals who are on the committees at pick a trade association, so they can understand exactly how that individual is advocating Pfizer's policy on a specific issue. The environment is a big one, without necessarily issuing a press release every day saying we disagree with X trade association, because we don't intend to do that. But what we do intend to do is participate actively, serve on the board, serve on the committees, and have conversations with our trade associations about what's important to Pfizer. We feel that's a much more important thing than issuing some press release or writing letters or trying to, in some way, demonstrate that we disagree with our trade associations on certain things. Obviously we do, and we have a corporate policy, which is set forth there in the second bullet, that says on our website, where we list all of our trade associations, we say what is obvious, that we may disagree with the views or positions held by trade associations on certain issues, and that policy and our engagement with them, I believe, is sufficient. And we also disclose, one of the things you can disclose, the portion of your trade association dues that is used by the trade association for political activity, and that's what Pfizer does. We don't disclose everything we give to a trade association, and we don't put limits on our trade associations, but we do disclose what they get from us that they use for political activity. And then just, we can go on and on about all of these issues, and you probably have questions about some of them when we move to the question phase, but I thought I'd just throw them up on one slide. But there is definitely an increased shareholder engagement on this issue right now, without a doubt. We have for years now, probably for at least 10 years, had shareholder proposals seeking information around political activity. But they were, you'd get one and you'd negotiate it, and then you get one another a couple years later. This year, I can't recall exactly the number we got, but we've got north of 5 just on this issue, and this is a year in which Pfizer was ranked in the top 5 in the 2 indexes that came out, one by the CPA and one by Baruch College, that really drilled down and studied the issue of disclosure and political activity and transparency, a word I'll use in quotes. And so despite those 2 rankings, we still got, I don't know how many, like I said, around 5 shareholder proposals on this issue. And I'll now engage in the process of having conversations and figuring out what's going to be next for us. But this is an issue, particularly because of Citizens United, will, as a company, start to hear from shareholders. They've seemed to move to lobbying, too. Some of the more recent shareholder proposals I've seen are more specific to lobbying, not just to corporate political activity, but give us all of your data on lobbying. Now, this is an issue that's very tricky. I don't even quite understand it. I'm not a lobbyist. I'm the corporate secretary, so I talk about these issues, but there's so many rules and regulations around it, and it's complicated. And the kind of information that they seem to be requesting, to me, raises concerns. And some of it is give us all of your, don't just give us the amounts you spend, because we do obviously have to provide reports on that, but give us the strategy behind why you're spending this here and that there, and why are you focused on this issue or that issue. And those kinds of issues are things that we don't necessarily want to put out there as a company like Pfizer. So that's one issue, though, that I think as you move forward, you will see it start to heat up. Pay to play is another issue that's related, obviously. At Pfizer, this really hasn't been a big issue for a long time, but we recently acquired a company that is a contractor, and so now we're starting to look at this issue much more closely. We're starting to consider policies around our senior executives and board level contributions, and it's probably something that we will move toward. I know lots of companies do have these, and it's definitely something that if you're involved in these issues and you have, politically active senior management and you are a contractor, you should talk to Stefan about it, because you will need to consider this as you move forward. And then the last thing is I just put in a shout out to the Conference Board Committee. You know, I've been engaged on a committee with 7 or 8 other corporates for the last year, including Microsoft and Merck. And we have really studied this issue, and we put out a handbook recently that just raises the issues that a company needs to consider. So you should get it from the from the Conference Board's website. Oh, we have copies in the back. Okay. So, you know, it's not intended to say what's the best practice. Again, that's something I can't stand, or the worst practice, or, you know, prevailing practice. It's supposed to just lay out the issues and the variety of practices that companies follow, so that as you talk about this with your board and your senior management, you're familiar with the issues and you're familiar with what's worked for certain companies. So I think that's it from me, right? Yep.